what that party's made of, what that party values. Democrats and liberals especially often criticize their own party for not acting boldly enough when given an electoral mandate. But in this moment, before it is judged by voters, what did Democrats do? What did Democratic politicians do? What did the Democratic Party do with these last 21 months? What did they stand for? What were they made of? It turns out what they were made of was historic.
The White House started this day on a much different note as President Obama signed his first bill into law. The new law makes it easier for workers to sue for pay discrimination.
With the stroke of a pen, another big break from the Bush era. Democrats in Congress have been trying to get this equal pay law through for nearly 2 years. Today it became a reality.
The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act for Women. That was President Obama and this Democratic Congress's first legislative achievement together way back in January of 2009, a bill that had languished in Congress for years. The start of much more legislative achievement to come.
Today, the president signs the bill imposing new rules on credit card companies. The bill is aimed at sparing consumers from sudden interest rate hikes.
Today, President Obama signs a bill that gives the Food and Drug Administration unprecedented power to regulate tobacco. The bill will allow the FDA to reduce nicotine in tobacco products, block labels such as low, tar, and light, and tobacco companies will also have to put large graphic warnings on cartons of cigarettes.
Lester, the president and Democrats can point to one imminent success here in Washington for the marchers. That is the imminent passage of a hate crimes bill that it would make it a federal crime to commit an assault based on sexual orientation.
The Senate has passed a bill that the president has been pushing that would extend government-sponsored health insurance for about 4 million uninsured children.
Children's health insurance, hate crimes legislation, tobacco regulation, credit card reform. Taken individually, all major legislative accomplishments. Taken together, some of the underpinnings of the most legislatively productive 21 months in decades.
The president did make an additional bit of history, a major revamping of how college student loans are going to be handed out for years to come. The legislation ends a 45-year program that provided federal subsidies to banks and private lenders that offered government-backed college loans. Starting July 1st, those guaranteed loans will be offered only by the Department of Education.
Three major figures of the Democratic Party, President Obama, Senator Ted Kennedy, and former President Bill Clinton, all gathered together with Republican Orrin Hatch for the signing of the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act. The bill triples the size of the country's national service programs, which are known as AmeriCorps.
We also have new numbers tonight on just how successful this Cash for Clunkers trade-in program actually was in the end.
Thanks to the Cash for Clunkers program, pretty much entirely to it. It's going to be a pretty solid August in terms of those auto sales.
Bailing out the American auto industry, which worked, by the way, tripling the size of AmeriCorps, America's national service programs, a fundamental reshaping of this country's student loan industry, which as someone who was up to my neck in student loans for a very long time, I can tell you was an unbelievably stupid system in drastic need of reform. Taxpayers were guaranteeing those loans, so assuming all of the risk, and paying private companies to administer the loans at a profit. So the student loan companies took on no risk and got paid for providing no service other than an insulating, pointless, waste-only layer of bureaucracy. That is now gone at long last. And the savings from that being gone means more loans for more Americans to go to college. Student loans and these other reforms accomplished and signed into law in not even 2 years. And we haven't even gotten to the big ticket items yet.
Less than a month in office, and the president made dramatic history with a simple stroke of the pen.
There you go. Let's go.
Signing into law America's largest economic recovery package ever.
You've certainly heard a lot about the stimulus bill over the last 18 months or so. In terms of its historic oomph, though, and not just the way it's being thought about in this election, consider that the stimulus was the single largest tax cut ever. It was the largest investment in clean energy ever. It was the single largest investment in education ever. Also, there was something that the kids call health reform.
It's as close to universal health care as America will likely ever come, and it will improve the health care of millions of Americans. In size and scope, it's being compared to Medicare and Social Security, and tomorrow, health care reform will be signed into law by the president.
Health reform, the legislative white whale that had eluded Americans for generations. Health costs, the thing in the middle of our deficit and debt fights that nobody ever talks about and that nobody was ever able to do anything about, despite the fact that they were massively responsible for America's fiscal disaster. Health reform, done. Health reform done with the stroke of a pen. Not single payer, not a European-style government system, but a system that will get more than 95% of the country onto health insurance and that will control our raging out of control, nationally disastrous health care costs for the first time ever. Then, 4 months later,
almost 2 years now after the entire banking system almost collapsed, President Obama signed the financial reform bill into law.
With the stroke of a presidential pen, the new financial regulatory reform law is aimed at curbing the excesses on Wall Street while protecting average Americans who live and work on Main Street.
All told, these reforms represent the strongest consumer financial protections in history. In history.
Wall Street reform, a landmark rolling back of financial deregulation that led this nation into the financial catastrophe that we experienced at the end of the Bush administration and the deepest recession in nearly a century. Historic headline-grabbing achievements like that ultimately overshadowed lots of other major agenda items of the last 2 years. Quote, the 111th Congress may be remembered for banner legislation such as healthcare reform, financial regulation, and the Recovery Act. But in our view, the real successes were the passage of bills that affected nearly every veteran in America. That's the national commander of the American Legion. President Obama and the Democrats in Congress did more for veterans in these last 21 months than has been done in a very long time. They approved the most funding ever for the Veterans Administration. They expanded VA access to veterans. They authorized additional assistance for caregivers of veterans and for female veterans. Over the last 21 months, Democrats passed 25 separate tax cuts. They passed the most significant land conservation bill in nearly 2 decades. They created a Consumer Financial Protection Agency. And, oh, by the way, they shrunk the federal deficit in the process. The Democratic Party has had control of the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives for the last 21 months. Forget the individual fights over the individual provisions of the individual bills. Forget the lost amendment fights and the process complaints. Democrats had a choice when they became the governing party, when they won those last 2 elections and they took control of the 2 branches of government that are subject to partisan control in our country. They could have governed in a way that was about accumulating political capital with the primary goal of winning the next election. They could have governed in constant campaign mode. Or they could have governed in a way that was about using their political capital, not accumulating more of it, about spending the political capital they had to get a legislative agenda done, to tackle big, complex, long-standing problems that had languished. The record of legislative achievement of the last 21 months was not designed to win the midterm elections, and it will not win the midterm elections. The pendulum will swing back toward the Republicans, and we will go back to divided government again. The legislative agenda of the last 21 months was policy, not politics. It was designed to get stuff done for the country. And in that sense, it's an investment in long-term political reward, not short-term political reward, as Democrats expect after a list of accomplishments like this to be judged as the party that took on problems when it had the chance, even if they had to pay a short-term political price. The political capital that Democrats accumulated over the last 2 elections was spent in this last 21 months. And it was spent on policy. Hard votes with long time horizons that don't translate into killing the other party in the next election. If you listen to the criticism, particularly from the left, heading into these elections, what you often hear is that Democrats are going to lose in these elections because they didn't get enough done. You know, big picture, if that were true, that would be depressing. It's not actually the true big picture, though. The fact is that Democrats got a lot done, a lot of hard stuff done on hard problems in a short amount of time. The price they may end up paying for that is losing a midterm election. Democrats' choice is whether or not it's worth it. Joining us now is NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Mr. Beschloss, it is good to see you again. Thanks.